Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Group Therapy, where we talk with brand and marketing leaders about, well, everything. Today, we are catching up with Jeremy Wold, head of marketing at Awardco. Jeremy, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Katie.
I would love to kick this off by just asking you to share with us the Awardco brand story, the short version, of course, and maybe a little bit about your origin story there.
Yeah, that sounds great. Okay, Awardco. Awardco, it's kind of an interesting name, but where it comes from, our founder, Steve, his dad was worked for Jostens rings. Do you remember those rings they got in high school and stuff? They got like these really weird, I don't know, rings
Yeah.
for different things. Anyway, his dad worked for that company and did the rings for like the Chicago Bulls for their championship rings and stuff like
Oh, I
that.
love this.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And so I did awards for things like that. And it's all very physical, right? Like it's very like, tangible kind of stuff.
A takeaway. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so that was the history of awards and recognition in the past. And Steve, our founder, was like, hey, what if we just plugged into Amazon and let anyone choose whatever the hell they want for awards? And so that's where it started, is him and his cousin basically coming together and saying, we can do this and open it up to any awards that anyone would like. And so they did that. They created it. And now we are about a 400-person company that does rewards and recognition for employees, as well as loyalty for things like Utah Jazz. Loyalty meaning like fans come in early and scan a certain code and they get points, which equates to money for fans at Jazz. So both employees and things like that. So the history was kind of like the physical, like, hey, we can do better than this. And they did. But kind of the output of that is a company that really empowers peer-to-peer and manager recognition and appreciation and engagement that I've really enjoyed coming here last 8 months.
I love that so much because that is like a very real example of the evolution of brand and new ideas and things changing and how you sort of have to change with it.
Yeah.
And I think your brand story specifically is so unique because you aren't just building a brand based on the product you sell, but it also is about promoting a very specific culture.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and there's some science behind it. And we do webinars on this periodically about like the science of gratitude and things like that, where we see that, those that feel gratitude and they appreciate each other, like are just more engaged. They just are happier at work. And so anyway, I'm happy to be a part of that, and a very small part of that really
Yeah.
at Awardco, but it's pretty fun.
So I guess one of my first questions is obviously like within the last 3 years, because we can't talk about marketing without talking about the pandemic and how that's changed brands. But I mean, I would imagine that there was a big shift between your product positioning, coming out of pandemic, obviously during pandemic, and then now where the climate's a little bit uncomfortable, right? We're hearing about layoffs and culture is so important, but it's now sort of a different view of that. Like, how has your brand repositioned, or like what type of conversations are you having related to just how things are right now?
I'll probably take this two different ways. So I've been in Awardco 8 months, and I'll talk about that first. Before that, Adobe for 7 years, and I'll talk about that and how they address that, if that's all right.
That sounds great.
Awesome. So first, Awardco. Yeah, it's interesting. So Awardco is all about employee appreciation, engagement, things like that. And so during the pandemic, again, before my time here at Awardco, did quite well. And why did they do quite well? Because there's all this remoteness going on. Everyone with, the pandemic, COVID, all this stuff, everyone was remote for a little while. And then it started to become hybrid. And then now it's a little bit weird, whatever that is. And in spite of all of that, even in the current climate of layoffs and things like that, companies want to make sure that the employees feel engaged and appreciated and really in the vision for what the company is all about, which is what we help empower. During the pandemic, it was about dispersed teams, right? Like everyone's out in their own ecosystem. And so just saying, hey, dude, great job, isn't going to happen as much
Yeah.
as an ecosystem that can help with that. And so that's where Awardco came in and was doing quite well in the pandemic because of such things too. So messaging wise, brand wise, we didn't really change much, if I'm honest about it. The brand was consistent for us. Campaigns, however, we did talk about current things going on, like the great resignation, things like that.
Yep.
Did have campaigns to address current things going on, but our brand didn't change, if I'm honest about it, during those times, because it didn't need to. It was
Mm-hmm.
kind of ever present for each of those scenarios. Any questions with that before I move on from
No,
award?
I think that's great because, I mean, what you're talking about is you're uniquely positioned to bring connection, and that's not going to change. And that message stays the same. It's like recognizing the people within your culture cross-functionally, within your own teams, making sure they see you, and whether that's in a remote scenario or in person, that value is there, which,
Yeah.
good for you. I think that's great.
Yeah, well, it's a cool company. I mean, like, right, like
Yeah.
it's not the only one in this industry, right? Like the industry's booming.
It's just like when you walk into work, there's just a lot of confetti, a lot of like
Right.
cookie day. Like I just imagine like, it's yoga afternoon,
Well, I've honestly
just like high vibes.
I've been a part of some cultures that are like rah
Yeah.
cultures of like confetti. That's not exactly what I'm describing.
Yeah. It's not
Those,
genuine.
yeah, it's more like it's personal.
Yeah.
It's never like, hey, everyone should be happy because you work here. It's like, great job on this, Jeremy, or others, like
Yeah.
of what you've done. And so it just allows for connection. So I just feel like that is definitely a trend that's been happening and will continue to happen as it's less about like a brand of how do I say this well? Like not being not genuine, but
Yeah.
genuine and appreciated for what you're doing and who you are is kind of a thing going forward. And so anyway, we've benefited because we have a system to do that.
Yeah. I think that's great. So I want to hear about your experience at Adobe because you were
Yeah,
there for 7 years and there during the pandemic.
sure.
So I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, so Adobe was different. Adobe's a global company, huge, and it's great. And when the pandemic hit and we all were working from home, we had to pivot quite a bit. It was we were a very online company, and for forever, and like people on my team and my manager was never in my same location, kind of thing. And so we were very remote to begin with. But what we had to pivot with was on events, things like that, where like normally an in-person event in Vegas had 25,000 people, and now we're like, all right, what do we do with this? Things like that. We had to pivot very quickly on that, and a large team had to deal with that, nights, weekends, all that stuff to try to figure that out. And so when COVID hit, it became not just we work remotely, but like everyone works remotely, and how do we deal with that? And so our digital first mentality for Adobe then had become pervasive with everything we did.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was interesting. We had to fumble through a few things, and I frankly think lead the charge on a few different things within the industry. And but I think we got it to a good spot of kind of with events in particular, which could be very in person throughout the world. Had to do hybrid events, virtual events, and all the things in between to ensure that we're empowering our customers and presenting our message for product and things like that in a meaningful way. But yeah, it was interesting. We had to pivot probably 10 different times. And
yeah, it's funny. As you know, my previous experience was in event production.
Yeah.
And it was interesting to watch the evolution that brands were going through during that time, not just because of the virtual component and the shift of, in-person events, and now we're having to figure out this virtual solution. I mean, I was on the team that was putting together Domapalooza, and I think the entire world shut down 2 weeks before that event was supposed to happen. And thankfully, they were one of the first, because of their investors that were, in China and Japan and things like that. They made the call earlier. But, as we're shifting the format, they now are moving towards virtual events exclusively, because what they found was it was easier to get people to come and engage with their brand when it was in that format. And so I think it almost forced all of us to catch up with like this digital space and being able to connect easier, have platforms and tools that connect easier. But it has definitely changed the marketing stories that people are pushing forward. And it's just such an interesting thing of, brand positioning, and also adding the element of like acceleration that was necessary because of the environment we were in. And then here we are trying to figure out what's next,
Well, to your point, color's all weird. I'm gonna fix that. Like for Adobe Summit, I think we had 25,000 people in person in Vegas typically.
Yeah.
And then we had 1 million views.
Yeah.
For the live event, when we had to shift like within weeks for that. So yeah, a lot broader exposure. I would say though, less meaningful exposure.
Oh, of course.
And so like there's a cost, right? Like you get broader brand, less connection to drive some revenue in there.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to shift gears a little bit. And we were talking about building employee culture as sort of one of the major aspects of what Awardco does. And I think a common pain point is building relationships internally with cross-functional partners, and that can be extremely challenging.
Sure.
So I'm curious what advice you have for marketers who maybe feel disconnected from, their cross-functional partners, and how to drive more of a sense of collaboration and team.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the perennial question for us in marketing, or really, any organization, right? Like as we have to work together. Well, a couple things I would say. Communication and empathy is probably, the first two things that come to mind. Communication about like what you guys are up to, what you're up to, what your plans are. Yes. Empathy, meaning understanding what other plans are there, what other goals might exist. I think if you have those two things together, you can really start to collaborate. And without those two things, I've discovered myself in past lives have like pushed things like too far, like as my plan, kind of thing. And it doesn't go well because everyone else has their own plans too. And so when you try to push your own plan without that empathy part, it becomes a little bit of a battle, or it could be. And so from a strategy point of view, I'm talking strategy right now, not execution. From a strategy point of view, getting into that communicating of like, what's the annual plan? What's the other annual idea? And even before getting that, like empathy towards others and really starting having some conversations before you get to those plans, then you can really start to work together towards united plans, unified plans, rather than just your plan. And I think everyone has great ideas, within their organizations, but then when it comes down to it, you can't execute alone. And when I've tried, it just becomes a thing that just either backfires, or I have to kind of bulldoze or something. And it's just never great for a lot of reasons. And so I think those two things are important. I think maybe like a third in there, communication, empathy, maybe data. Data has been something that certainly I've used throughout forever, but more lately, I'm seeing data could be a signal to partners that you understand what's going on and you can adjust what's going on based upon what's going on with other teams. And again, this is kind of high level, but data for me has meant sharing what has gone on, sharing gaps within data, and being very open about that with our financial people, with sales, with CS, with whatever team. That endears trust. That one, you're not just trying to sell something. I think marketing has a kind of a bad rap saying we're trying to sell something internally and externally. And I don't think that's accurate. And I think we can dispel that accuracy by saying, let's present data and let's present faults within that data of where we can do better. And so those are the three things that come to mind from a strategy point of view. Execution is a very different thing, because that is about one, being aligned to leaders, and then all leaders just, and dispelling that information about what we're all up to, what we're all aligned to do within teams, within managers and directors and all that stuff, so that we can kind of move towards united front. And then within that, again, being empathetic to changes along the way. But I think it starts with a strategy, and it starts with communicating, being empathetic, and then really sharing data, including all the bad parts of data.
I think there is something to just that transparency about the things that are going well and that aren't, and what the data says about that. I also find myself struggling with speed. It's really easy to sacrifice collaboration because it feels like everything needs to be done today, And so it's often, I think, hard to remember that pause to include others is actually going to push that great idea forward better and stronger by, collaborating, even though sometimes I want to move as fast as possible. And I know that could maybe cause friction or holdups. So I guess my question is, what do you do on the execution side in order to make the tough call in your position? Do you feel like you're sacrificing speed for collaboration? And what's that balance, I guess?
Well, that's a great question too. I think great questions, Katie.
Thank you.
But that's a good question, because you're absolutely right. The more people you bring into a decision-making process, the slower it gets, all that kind of stuff. I was purposeful to say that was the strategy. Strategy meaning annual, quarterly, maybe bi-monthly, I don't know, something that's not every day. Speed to me often means how many people are involved with a decision-making process to get things out the door for things that have already been decided upon, not the speed to decide on strategy. So there's a strategy thing, and I do think that does take time. And then there's the execution part of that, about producing content, producing something. I would say limit that to a distinct core group that is aligned to other goals, but is limited. I would not pull in every other partner for decision making or approval process for content necessarily. I used to do backing up. Adobe, I had when I first joined, I think I had 97 stakeholders to feed into me and what I was doing for adobe.com, our website. That only grew over time, over the 7 years. And so there had to be decisions about who's a part of approvals? What does that look like? It was very interesting because 97 grew into hundreds, right? So what does that look like? And so we would have various leaders approve strategy, briefs, things like that, not the output. What they could do is feedback on the output, saying, is this correct? Is this not correct? But they couldn't necessarily say images or, this person versus the other, whatever. They couldn't do that. And so I would just shut that down. And because like that held us up on speed. And so going back to your speed conversation, I think there's ways of getting some velocity, some speed going on for multiple things of content that can get out, yet still including stakeholders, key stakeholders and partners at levels, and not saying that they should be involved with every level.
Yeah. Well, and I think
Yeah,
especially right now where a lot of people are operating with fewer resources just because of
yeah,
the environment right now. And, we know that. We know what our marketing budgets are. I think everybody's kind of in a similar position trying to
right,
be smart.
right,
And, so that means that momentum has to continue in spite of that.
yeah,
And it's very easy to halt or, what is it? The run, wait, whatever the little saying is. But, I feel like it's very common in marketing where maybe we're aligned on that strategy and then we're go, 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 go. And sometimes there's that hurrying and then pausing.
yeah,
And I'm like, at this point, like, I think that it's an opportunity for us to be trying new ideas, testing new channels, and really doing what we can to figure out what's working.
yeah.
And then we can go and refine and fix and reiterate and go back and make those adjustments. But to hold up that process, there just isn't time for it, you know?
I totally agree. Well, something that came up this week, yesterday, in fact, is
Mm,
experimentation is tricky right now.
yeah.
And, but yet, maybe ripe for it. If people are pulling back, everyone's pulling back, myself, everybody,
Mhm.
for budgets and expenditures and brand exposure, all that kind of stuff. Where do experimentations and testing and trying new ideas come from? And I feel like that is certainly a risk for every marketer right now this year, is to pull back so hard that you don't try new things and then just become safe. And I feel like that's a risk for us. I feel like it's a risk for most marketers, is to
Mhm.
fall back to what works versus trying new things and experimenting with something new and growing. So I think you're
Yeah.
honest. Okay.
I think this is a great note to end on. A
Yeah.
positive one, a high one. Try new things. Just do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. This was great, and we're we're really thrilled about having these conversations with people where it's just like this, to
Yeah.
just kind of talk about what came up yesterday and what came up last week, and
Yeah.
hopefully everybody will feel a little bit less alone.
Yeah.
So,
Well, thanks, Katie. I really appreciate it.
yeah.